Reactions are pouring in after two US fighter jets harassed a Lebanon-bound Iranian passenger aircraft in Syrian airspace. Lebanon's resistance movement Hezbollah called for a serious international response, citing the presence of Lebanese citizens on board the plane. Hezbollah also expressed solidarity with Iran and Syria in connection with the incident, stressing that the US military presence in Syria and its airspace amounts to an act of occupation. The Palestinian resistance movements Hamas and Islamic Jihad also strongly condemned the harassment of the Iranian airliner. Hamas said endangering civilians aboard the plane was an act of terrorism. Also, the Islamic Jihad said Iran is entitled to take retaliatory measures against what it called an act of terrorism. Jason Unruhe is a political commentator and he joins us now out of Ontario. Jason, welcome. What do you think is the bigger picture here, in your opinion? You know, US claims that it had to identify the Iranian passenger aircraft by using warplanes has been described as ridiculous.
I find this claim that they were trying to identify the plane as simply facetious. The fact is that there is a very significant difference between military aircraft and civilian aircraft. When you look at something that's like a fighter jet, it is significantly different from a passenger airliner. It's much smaller, it's much narrower. This would be very easy to be able to tell even from the ground. I mean, there are people who can tell from on the ground whether or not this is a civilian or military aircraft. And I believe that there are beacons on each plane that put out a signal that tells them who they are and where they're going. I'm not exactly sure the technology for that, but at least from a visual inspection alone, it would be very easy to determine that the plane was not military in any way, shape, or form. I think this is a very deliberate act by the United States to try to provoke an incident with Iran. I think that not only maybe they were trying to get it shut down, but they were trying to scare the aircraft, create some kind of instance. It was very much an intimidation tactic, trying to threaten Iran and its citizens, and also at the same time threatening the citizens of several other countries as well. This was a very provocative act. This was very deliberate. This was very malicious, intended to spark many hostilities. I mean, this occurs at a time when Iran and the United States are on very terrible terms after U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, and Iran is refusing to deal with the nonsense that has surrounded that. Trump has insisted on a new agreement. There's already one that's still there. There's accusations of building nuclear technology, military nuclear technology, which is a completely baseless accusation. There's also the recent explosions that have taken place in nuclear facilities inside of Iran. So I don't think that it's a coincidence that this would happen at this time. I think it was very much a terroristic response intended to provoke fear, maybe to invoke the memory of the 1988 incident in the minds of many people and in the Iranian people and the government as well. So I think this was very blatantly an attack that was intended to try to frighten the Iranian people and send a message to the government as well that the U.S. is not done with its destabilization efforts and its so-called regime change strategy.
Right. So, Jason, you think this is part of the U.S. policy since it withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in May 2018 to put pressure on Tehran and perhaps maybe to prevent others from taking a similar journey from Iran to Lebanon, to isolate Iran and maybe Lebanon at the same time?
I would certainly agree with that assessment. It's very much a harassment tactic, and it would make anybody flying to Iran or from Iran or the associated countries with the flights very nervous that this kind of thing can happen. As we saw previously, the United States deliberately put the Iranian airline industry in sanctions, making it very difficult to get necessary plane parts or even new planes in general And this is a tremendous safety risk intended to limit the amount of say foot traffic between Iran and its allied countries. So I think once you put this on top of it, it's intimidating, trying to intimidate anyone from going from one country to another inside of Iran, and very much could also be aimed at trying to hinder Iran's airline industry, which is already under sanctions from the United States.
Okay, Jason, appreciate it. Thank you very much for your contribution there. Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us out of Ontario.